Hello, my name is Carla, and I have chosen the text called The Stolen Ones from our latest topic, Australia. So, I will start by giving a short introduction to the text and then explain what the stolen generation actually is. Then I will present my analysis and a characteristic of the text. Then I would like to provide a perspective on Kevin Rudd's sorry speech, and at last I will present my conclusion. So, the genre of the text is an article, but more specific, a feature article, given it is an aspect of a major event, but written from a personal angle. The article was published the 1st of April 1999 in the 311th edition of the British magazine called New Internationalist. So, the main character in the story, in the article, and the writer of the article is called Chalamino Mia. And being removed from her partly Aboriginal family as a child, she's actually a part of the stolen generation. So through this article, Mia tries to express the scale and consequences of the crime, and she also presents what needs to be done in order to reunite the people of Australia. So dealing with this particular topic, the article tells about the relationship between the indigenous and non-indigenous people, as well as the history of Australia. So, first of all, the stolen generation describes a period in Australia where Aboriginal children were taken from their own families and brought into white society instead. But the children were only removed if they had some white blood in their family, for example, a white grandfather or likely. But in this way, the Australian government actually thought that the black population would die out within a few generations. So, it is this particular problem the text called The Stolen Ones is taking its starting point from. So, the website of the New Internationalist says that it is Chalamino Mia herself who wrote the article, even though the text actually refers to her in third person doing the subhead, which I thought was a bit odd, but however, the article is intended the government of Australia and the stolen generation as well. And Mia writes to the government to make them realize the damage this action actually has caused, and to get an apology to the stolen generation as well. In addition to this, she says, non-indigenous Australians must cultivate a deeper understanding of extreme effects of removing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people from their land and family. So I think that Mia knows that this will only be possible if the government starts bringing attention to the topic. But Mia, she also writes to the stolen generation, and she does that to convince them that being taken away actually hasn't led to any good for them, but also to make them come forward and tell their own experience with the removal. So, all in all, Mia wants to verbalize the problem of the stolen generation and to get an apology from the government as well. In this article, she makes it very clear that all of this is necessary to a future reconciliation between the indigenous and non-indigenous people. So Mia actually publishes her text just 2 years after the result of a national inquiry called Bringing Them Home Goes Public. And this survey actually shows that being separated from their families has resulted in violence, alcoholism, drug abuse, and so on to the children it has concerned. So, until this big revolution, the practice of removing Aboriginal children hadn't really been discussed in public. So I believe that Mia takes this as her chance to create even more attention on the subject and to state her own opinion as well. The text is written in a very formal language from a subjective angle. But in the beginning of the text, the language is very descriptive, and this especially occurs in the passages where Mia presents her own and her family's story about being split up and put into white society. But afterwards, her language became more based on facts. So she mainly uses herself and her family as an example of children from the stolen generation, but she also uses a quote from Mick Dodson, who is an Aboriginal activist, to present the scale of the crime. And he says, "Genocide is not just the physical destruction of a people, and Australia signed the Genocide Convention, but genocide includes the forced removal of children from one group to another group." So, not only did this crime bring great damage to the families it has concern, but it actually goes under the definition of a genocide. So, using this exact quote, Mia mocks the government and makes it very clear that an apology is only in its place. But throughout the text, Mia applies several rhetorical devices, but I have chosen to focus on ethos and pathos. So Mia applies pathos when she tries to trigger the reader's emotions. For example, this manipulation was designed to break down the strong bonding that existed in most Aboriginal families. They wanted us to think that our families were not interested in us, so that we would leave our heritage behind and take our place in white society. This experience made all of us confused, hurt, and insecure for a very long time. So everyone will be able to relate to the thought about losing their own family. So in this way, Mia actually makes you sympathize with her because you feel so sorry for her, and I believe that makes her message come out even stronger. So she uses pathos very well. But she also applies pathos when she describes her own development from child to adulthood, and she says, "The shock of going from richness of family life to this isolated, lonely, and alien environment was almost more than I could bear. There was no sense of family, affection, or personal attention. This made it very difficult for me to relate to people later in life." And she also says, "I had gone from being boisterous and outgoing to be very introverted. I had to go inside myself to survive." So, if being separated from her family could do such thing with Mia's personality, then the crime must have been insane, and it makes people aware of the wounds the action actually have left on the Aborigines' families. But Mia also applies ethos in her article to make herself seem more trustworthy and gain respect from the audience. And she does that by telling her own story about the removal, very detailed, but she also includes stories from the rest of her family, and she does that to state that many Aboriginals share the same feeling as her on the subject. And in addition to this, she also involves the national inquiry I talked about earlier. So at last I have chosen to provide a perspective on Kevin Rudd's sorry speech. And in 2008, 9 years after The Stolen One was published, the former Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, he held a speech where he finally apologized to the stolen generation on behalf of the government. So the speech was primarily intended the indigenous people, but also the rest of the population as well. And with the speech, Rudd tries to picture a new chapter of Australian history where everyone will be treated equally and the separation between the indigenous and non-indigenous people belongs to the past. But I believe Rudd's speech is partly successful because he does apologize for the events of the past, and given he's speaking about a united future, he creates a national feeling among the people. But some, and especially the indigenous people, might say that the apology comes way too late. The speech probably should have been held at the same time as the result of the national inquiry was published to get fully accepted among the Aborigines. But all things considered, the text called The Stolen Ones is written to create attention on the topic of the stolen generation. And I think that Mia succeeded. Because even though the sorry speech is held 9 years after she posted her article, Kevin Rudd apologizes and takes responsibility for the crime, just like Mia wanted. And that was all for me.